The first thing that came back was sound. A steady electronic beeping, spaced so evenly it could have been a metronome keeping time for a song nobody was playing. Then smell, layered in pieces. The sharp antiseptic bite of a place that gets scrubbed every 4 hours, and underneath it something warmer, older, like coffee that had been sitting on a burner since someone forgot about it around midnight. I tried to open my eyes. The light was blue-white and institutional, the kind that makes everything look like it belongs in a filing cabinet. My body was reporting in before my brain could catch up. Right knee throbbing under something tight, wrapped and braced. Chest bound where the ribs had cracked. The pain was deep and dull, living underneath whatever they had dripped into my arm, and when I shifted even an inch, the whole right side of my torso objected like a door swinging on a rusted hinge. The room took shape in pieces. Tile ceiling, ivy pole, a curtain half drawn, and a woman asleep in the vinyl chair beside my bed. She was late 40s, maybe older, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a clip that was losing the fight. Hospital scrubs, the dark blue kind the trauma floor wore at Grant Medical, a lanyard badge resting on her collarbone, turned at an angle so I could only see part of the text. Her hands were folded in her lap and her chin was dipped toward her chest, and she had the posture of someone who had been sitting in that chair for a very long time. I opened my mouth. My throat was sandpaper. The monitor must have changed rhythm when I moved, because the woman stirred before I could make a sound. She opened her eyes and looked at me the way nurses look at patients they have been watching for hours, with that particular mix of professional calm and something gentler underneath. Something that said she had already made decisions on my behalf while I was unconscious, and she was ready to explain them. She leaned forward, pressed the call button clipped to the bed rail, and poured water from a pink plastic pitcher into a cup with a bent straw. Held it to my mouth. Small sips. I drank. The water was lukewarm and tasted like the inside of a refrigerator, but it was the best thing I had ever put in my mouth. I drank until she pulled the cup away. Then I looked at her badge. The first time I read it, the letters swam, medication and exhaustion, and the fluorescent light turning everything into a glare. The second time, the first name registered, Bonnie. The third time, the last name came through clear as a bell in an empty church. Pratt. Your emergency contacts, Bonnie said, her voice low and steady, the way someone delivers lab results they have already reviewed twice. The hospital called 14 times. Nobody answered. I stared at the badge, then at her face, then at the badge again. That's my last name. On your badge. She held my gaze. I know. The monitor filled the silence between us, counting off my heartbeats like a court reporter logging testimony. I signed your surgical consent, she said, 6 hours ago. You had internal bleeding and the surgeon needed authorization within minutes. Your emergency contacts were unreachable. She paused. And in the pause, her voice shifted from clinical to something else, something that had nothing to do with nursing. So I did. Why would you do that? Bonnie looked at me for a long time. Long enough for the monitor to count out 10 of my heartbeats, maybe 12. Her expression was the expression of a woman deciding how much truth a person can absorb at 2 in the morning in a hospital bed with cracked ribs and a morphine drip. Because 25 years ago, she said, your parents left me too. 2. The word landed last and stayed longest. Left me too. The word too does something that the rest of the sentence cannot do on its own. It turns a single event into a pattern. It implies a before. It implies that I was not the first person my parents had failed to show up for, and that the woman sitting in the vinyl chair beside my bed had been waiting for them long before I existed. I opened my mouth to ask the next question, the obvious one, the one that was already forming itself out of the morphine fog. But Bonnie shook her head. Rest first. I'll be here in the morning. She leaned back in the chair and pulled her badge lanyard over her head, setting it on the side table where I could see it clearly. Bonnie Pratt, RN. I'm not going anywhere. The gentleness was worse than any answer she could have given. It implied that what she had to tell me was the kind of thing you needed someone to stay for. When I opened my eyes again, the light had changed. Morning, gray daylight through blinds that someone had cracked open. The coffee smell was fresh now, coming from a paper cup on the rolling tray beside my bed. Bonnie was still there. fresh scrubs. She must have gone home, showered, changed, and come back. Her shift was over. She was here anyway. "How long have you known?" I asked. My voice was thin and scraped. "That I'm their daughter. I saw a toddler behind your father when he closed the door on me. 25 years ago." The corner of her mouth moved, something that was almost a smile but not quite. "I saw Pratt on the admissions board last night. Put the age together. Went to check. And you just stayed?" "I was 7 once. Appendicitis. Foster home number 3. She picked up her coffee, held it with both hands. Nobody came. She told me the rest in pieces, the way you tell a story you have carried so long it has worn grooves into specific shapes. Adopted at 2 by a couple in Westerville. A nice house with a room upstairs and a window that looked out at a maple tree. 2 years of birthday parties and bedtime songs, and a mother who measured her height on the doorframe with a pencil. But Bonnie had night terrors. Regressions. The kind of disruption that happens when a toddler gets pulled from one world and dropped into another. Ron and Shirley Pratt did not get her help. They did not call a specialist or read a book or ask anyone what was normal for a child who had already lost one set of parents before she could form a sentence. They quit. The preschool called first. Then social services. The Pratts told the caseworker they could not handle it. Bonnie was 4 years old. 18 years later, she found them. Public records. She drove to Westerville, parked on the street, walked up the front steps, and rang the bell. Ron opened the door. Behind him, on the living room floor, a little girl was stacking blocks on a rug. Their biological daughter, the one they had after giving Bonnie away. "Your father said 5 words," Bonnie told me. "We're not your family." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. Then he closed the door. "Your mother never came out. That was 25 years ago," Bonnie said. "Your parents left me too." I listened, and my mind went somewhere else entirely. It went to the room. The upstairs room in my parents' house that had been locked for as long as I could remember. "Storage," my mother said, every time I asked. I was 12 when I found the teddy bear in the attic. Small, brown, worn soft at the ears, with the name Bonnie stitched in pink thread on one ear. I brought it downstairs and held it up, and my mother's face went white so fast it was like watching milk spill across a table. "Neighbor's kid," she said, and her hand was already reaching for it. "Throw it out." I did not throw it out. I hid it under my bed, behind a box of old shoes, and I never asked about it again. 15 years. I had kept a stranger's teddy bear for 15 years without understanding why. The fluorescent hum above my hospital bed had a frequency to it, a sealed-in buzz, the kind of sound a room makes when it has been closed for a long time and something inside is still running. "I never changed my last name," Bonnie said. She set the coffee down. It was the only name anyone ever gave me. My phone buzzed on the tray beside the coffee. I picked it up. 14 missed calls from a number that could only have been the hospital trying to reach my parents the night of my accident. And below those, 6 new ones from this morning. Mom, 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 Dad, Mom, Mom. The ship had docked. They had finally noticed. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's heels on hospital linoleum, quick and sharp. The rhythm of a woman who had been panicking since yesterday morning and had not stopped moving since. My father's heavier tread behind her, slower, controlled. The pace of a man who processes emergencies by refusing to rush. The door swung open and my mother came in like weather. Perfume and tears and her handbag already on the bed and both hands on my face before I could say a word. "Oh God! Oh, honey. We were on the ship. The phones would not work. We caught the first flight out of San Juan this morning. Your father nearly had a stroke on the tarmac." My father stood in the doorway. Broad shoulders, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, polo shirt tucked into khakis even on a travel day. He surveyed the room the way he used to survey job sites when he was still working, checking the wiring in an unfamiliar building, mapping the layout, assessing. Bonnie was by the window. She had been there when they arrived, filling out a chart on a clipboard, off shift but staying. She looked up. Something happened to the room. The air rearranged itself. My father's face changed. It was subtle. The kind of shift you would miss if you were not watching for it, if you had not spent 27 years studying the micro-expressions of a man who communicated primarily through silence. His eyes moved from Bonnie's face to the badge on her lanyard, from the badge back to her face, then, without turning his head, to my mother. My mother turned. She saw Bonnie, and she made a sound that was not a word, an inhalation that caught somewhere between her throat and her chest and stayed there, trapped, vibrating. Her hand went to my father's arm. "Who?" my mother started. "I'm the nurse who signed your daughter's surgical consent," Bonnie said. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of a woman who had spent 24 years delivering hard information in hospital rooms. When nobody else was available, my father's jaw tightened. "We appreciate that. Your daughter lost significant blood. The surgeon needed authorization within minutes. Your emergency contacts were unreachable for the duration of the evening. We were out of the country. 14 calls. The monitor counted my heartbeats into the silence. I watched my parents the way I used to watch animals at the clinic. The ones brought in after something had scared them. The ones whose bodies told you everything their owners could not explain. My father positioning himself between my mother and Bonnie, his hand going to the doorframe as if measuring an exit. My mother's inability to hold Bonnie's gaze for more than 2 seconds before her eyes slid sideways to the floor, to the window, to my IV line, to anywhere that was not the face of the woman standing 6 feet away. They recognized her. The reaction was too specific, too controlled, too practiced to be anything else. My mother's hand going to the pearl earring she always touched when she was buying time. My father's silence, the dangerous kind. The kind he used when I asked about the locked room at 16 and he said, without looking up from his newspaper, "Nothing up there you need, kiddo. The third plate at Thanksgiving." The teddy bear in the attic, the color draining from my mother's face. All of it was right here in this hospital room, written across my parents' bodies in a language I had spent 27 years being trained not to read. Bonnie picked up her bag. "Your parents are here now. You're in good hands." She looked at me, and something passed between us that had no name yet, something that would need weeks to grow into a word like sister. She placed a card on the tray beside the water pitcher. "My number, if you need anything." She walked toward the door. My father stepped aside, but the hallway was narrow, and their shoulders nearly touched as she passed. He held his breath. I watched his chest stop moving for the space of 2 seconds, and then she was gone and the room was smaller without her. My mother fussed with my blanket. My father sat in the vinyl chair that still held the shape of the woman who had occupied it all night. He did not mention the name on the badge. My mother did not mention the name on the badge. I waited for one of them to say something. Anything. An explanation, a lie, a denial. They said nothing. My mother offered to get me food from the cafeteria. My father asked about the doctor's discharge timeline. That was the catalyst. The thing that broke the 27 years open was not a revelation. It was an absence. It was the thing my parents chose not to say, standing in the exact spot where a stranger had stayed all night and signed a form so that a surgeon could save my life while they floated in the Caribbean with their phones turned off. I looked at the card on the tray. Bonnie Pratt, RN. A phone number. And on the back, in small handwriting that leaned slightly to the right, "When you're ready. My apartment, 2nd floor, Clintonville." The wooden stairs creaked under every step, and I took them one at a time, ribs aching, knee stiff inside the brace, gripping the railing with both hands. My cat was waiting at the door with the expression she reserved for extended absences, a look that said she had been managing perfectly fine but would appreciate an explanation. 3 days had passed since my parents arrived at the hospital. 3 days of hovering. My mother brought a casserole on Thursday. My father fixed the bathroom faucet that had been dripping since August. They did what they had always done when something in our family required attention. They attended to everything except the thing that actually mattered. When I mentioned the nurse who had stayed with me, my mother changed the subject to the cruise and how the buffet gave my father indigestion. When I said the nurse had our last name, my father looked up from the faucet and said, "Common name. Lots of Pratts. Lots of Pratts." I had been turning that sentence over for 3 days, the way you turn a coin you found on the ground, checking both sides, wondering if it was worth anything. The old version of me would have let it go. That version had practice. She let go of the teddy bear at 12, the locked door at 16, the third plate at Thanksgiving at 23. She was good at letting go. She had been trained by two people who loved her on the condition that she never looked too closely at the way that love was built. That version of me was sitting on the couch with a cat on her lap and a brace on her knee and a card from a stranger on the coffee table. The card had a phone number on one side and 3 words on the other. "When you're ready." I picked up my phone. "Bonnie, it's Erin, from the hospital." A pause, warm and unsurprised. "I was wondering when you'd call. I want to know everything. Then we should talk in person." I hung up and looked at the ceiling. My parents' house was 11 minutes away by car. The attic was up the stairs at the end of the hallway, past the locked room that my mother had been calling storage since before I could spell the word. Whatever was in that room had been sealed behind a brass knob and a key I had never been offered for 27 years. I was going to need to go back in that house, and this time, I was going to open every door they had taught me to walk past. The coffee shop in German Village had exposed brick and mismatched chairs, and the kind of energy that lets two strangers sit across from each other without anyone wondering why they look uncomfortable. Bonnie was already sitting by the window when I arrived. Saturday morning, and she looked like a different person. Here she was, just a woman in her late 40s, wearing a gray sweater and jeans, her hair down for the first time since I had met her. She had a coffee in front of her and she was holding the cup with both hands, the way people hold things when their hands need something to do. I sat across from her, ordered a tea. We looked at each other for a while without speaking, two strangers who shared a last name and a set of parents and nothing else except the accident that had dropped one of us into the other's hospital. "I said I would tell you everything," Bonnie said, "so I will." She told me the complete version, the details she had left out in the hospital. The night terrors, 3 and 4 times a week, the kind of screaming that wakes the neighbors, the regressions, the tantrums, the aftermath of whatever had happened to her before the Pratts. Things even she did not fully know because adoption records in the late 70s were sealed tighter than bank vaults. "They could have gotten help," Bonnie said. She turned her coffee cup on the table, rotating it a quarter turn at a time. "A child psychologist, a support group, anything. Instead, your father told the caseworker they could not handle it. Handle it. Like I was a plumbing problem. 6 foster homes between the ages of 4 and 18, aged out with a garbage bag of clothes and a box of personal items. Nursing school on Pell Grants and overnight shifts at a gas station in Zanesville. At 24, the search, the doorbell, the 5 words. Bonnie reached into her wallet. The wallet was old leather, cracked at the fold, the kind of wallet a person keeps because replacing it would mean admitting that the things inside have outlasted the container. She pulled out a card. Small, rectangular, faded to the color of weak tea. On the front, a cartoon bear wearing a party hat. Above it, in printed letters, "Happy 3rd birthday." She opened it. Inside, in handwriting I recognized as clearly as I would recognize my own face in a mirror. Love, Mom, and Dad. My mother's cursive. The careful, slightly looping script she used on permission slips and yearbook inscriptions and the checks she wrote for my college tuition. The same hand. The same pen pressure. The same slight upward tilt at the end of the word love. "This is the only proof I have that they were ever mine," Bonnie said. She set the card on the table between us, next to the salt shaker and a napkin dispenser and 2 cups of coffee. I've carried it since I aged out of the system, 31 years. She looked at it the way you look at something you have memorized so completely that you could recreate it from memory but still need to see it to believe it was real. Sometimes I think I keep it to prove to myself it actually happened. Something shifted behind my sternum. While I was learning to ride a bicycle in Westerville, Bonnie was carrying this card through foster home number 4, number 5, number 6, like a passport to a country that had already revoked her citizenship. While my father read me bedtime stories, Bonnie was falling asleep in a bed that did not belong to her, holding a card that said, "Love, Mom, and Dad," from parents who had chosen to stop being hers. "I'm going to find out what happened," I said. "Legally, I want the records. You don't have to do this." "I know. That's why I'm doing it." Bonnie looked at me for a long time. Then she closed the birthday card, slipped it back into her wallet, and put the wallet in her jacket pocket, close to her chest. I drove home and went straight to my bedroom, got down on my hands and knees, which was harder than it sounds, with cracked ribs and a braced knee, and reached under my bed past a box of old shoes and a dust bunny the size of a small animal. My hand found what it was looking for, the teddy bear, brown, soft at the ears, smaller than it had been when I hid it here at 12. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the bed and held it in my lap and looked at the name stitched in pink thread on one ear. Bonnie. The B was coming loose from the fabric. 15 years under my bed, and the first letter of her name was starting to let go. Monday morning, my parents went to church. They had gone to Westerville Community Church every Sunday and every other Wednesday for as long as I could remember, and Monday mornings my mother attended a women's Bible study group that ran from 9 to 11. My father tagged along to have coffee with the men's group in the fellowship hall. They would be gone for at least 2 hours. I drove to Westerville. 11 minutes. Parked on the street around the corner so the neighbors would not see my car in the driveway. The spare key was under the ceramic frog by the front step, the same ceramic frog that had been there since I was in middle school, the one my mother called charming and my father called ridiculous but tolerated because it was easier than arguing. The house was empty and still. It smelled the way it always smelled. Lemon cleaner, the ghost of cinnamon, and something older underneath. The particular scent of a house that 2 people have occupied for 30 years. I went past the living room where my father's recliner sat facing the television, past the kitchen where my mother's pearl earrings were, sitting on the windowsill next to a bottle of dish soap, left there while she washed the breakfast plates. Down the hallway to the closet at the end, where a pull-down ladder led to the attic. The attic was hot and close and smelled like old paper and mothballs, and the particular mustiness of boxes that have not been opened in decades. My father organized things the way he organized everything, labeled, stacked, categorized by year. I found what I was looking for in the 3rd row, behind a box marked Xmas Decor 2 and next to a set of golf clubs nobody had used since Clinton was president. A cardboard box in my father's square handwriting. Misc Tax 75 to 90. Inside, tax returns. Decades of them, filed chronologically, held together with rubber bands that snapped when I touched them. I photographed everything, every page, every form, every line. I did not take the originals because I did not want them to know I had been here, and because a photograph on my phone was just as legible and considerably harder to destroy. I found what I was looking for in the 1982 return. The box on the form labeled Dependents, the number written in my father's handwriting, 2 dependents. For tax year 1982, Bonnie had been in foster care since 1981. I checked 1983. Same number, 2 dependents. My parents had claimed a child they had already given away as a tax deduction for at least 2 additional years after she stopped living under their roof, after she stopped eating their food, after she stopped being tucked into the bed in the room upstairs with the maple tree outside the window. They had collected money from the government for a daughter they had handed to a social worker and never looked back for. My hands were shaking when I put the box back in its place and repositioned the Christmas decorations and the golf clubs. I climbed down from the attic and stood in the hallway. The locked room was 6 steps away. Same door, same brass knob. I tried it. Still locked, the way it had been locked every day of my life. I pressed my palm flat against the wood and stood there for a moment, then pulled my hand back and left the house and put the key under the ceramic frog and drove away. Wednesday morning, I met Bonnie at the Franklin County Probate Court downtown. She was wearing a navy blue cardigan and carrying a folder with her identification documents. Under Ohio law, as the adoptee, she was the one with the standing to request her own records. I could not do this for her. She had to walk through those doors herself and ask the state of Ohio to confirm what had been done to her. We sat in plastic chairs in a hallway that smelled like floor wax and vending machine coffee. 2 hours of waiting. Bonnie sat with her hands in her lap, the compass rose tattoo on her inner wrist visible below the sleeve of her cardigan, and she did not fidget or check her phone or make small talk. She sat the way I imagined she had learned to sit in waiting rooms across the entire span of her childhood, with the patience of a person who had learned early that institutions operated on their own schedule and your anxiety about it would not make them move any faster. The clerk called her name. We went to the counter together. The result: adoption of Bonnie Lynn, birth surname redacted per Ohio statute, finalized March of 1979 by Ronald and Shirley Pratt, Franklin County. Then the clerk checked a second database. Termination of parental rights, she typed, waited, typed again. Looked at her screen, then at Bonnie, then back at the screen. There's no termination of parental rights on file. Bonnie went very still beside me. The clerk checked again at my request. The adoption was finalized. Bonnie had been placed in emergency foster custody in 1981, but the Pratts had never appeared before a judge to formally relinquish their parental rights. The state had processed Bonnie through the system. The paperwork had moved forward, but the original adoption decree had never been legally dissolved. Bonnie Pratt was still, in the eyes of the state of Ohio, the legal daughter of Ronald and Shirley Pratt. We sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot with the windows down and the October air coming in sharp and clean. Bonnie held the folder in her lap. She had not spoken since the clerk's office. "You're still their daughter," I said. "I've been their daughter this whole time," she said quietly. 45 years. And they never once picked up the phone. Thursday evening, I drove to Westerville. My father's truck was in the driveway, freshly washed for the second time that week. The porch light was on early. My mother always turned it on early in autumn. I let myself in with my key. The house smelled like cinnamon and brown sugar, which meant my mother had been baking since at least 4, which meant they had spent the afternoon preparing their positions in separate rooms. My mother was in the kitchen, wiping down a counter that was already clean. My father was in his recliner. Television on, volume low, tuned to a channel he was not watching. He did not stand when I walked in. He just turned his head and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, with an expression that said the reason for my visit was obvious, and he had decided before I arrived that the conversation would be short. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had eaten every meal of my childhood, where I had done homework and blown out birthday candles and sat across from 2 parents who smiled at me over pot roast and corn on the cob, while a locked room upstairs held the outline of a child they had already given away. I pulled out my phone, opened the photographs, set the phone on the table. "You adopted a little girl in 1979, I said. My voice was steady because I had practiced this in the car, sitting in the driveway for 15 minutes with the engine off, saying the words out loud until they stopped shaking. Her name was Bonnie. You gave her a room upstairs. You measured her height on the doorframe with a pencil. And then you gave her away. She was 4 years old." My father looked at the phone screen, the tax returns, the courthouse printout, 2 dependents. Then he looked at me, then, slowly, at the television, as if the answer to his daughter's accusation might be playing on Channel 9. "That was a long time ago," he said. "You never signed the papers, Dad. You never terminated your parental rights. Bonnie is still your daughter, legally, right now, today, according to the state of Ohio." My mother's hands were in her lap. She was looking at them as if they belonged to someone she did not recognize, someone who had signed a birthday card and measured a child's height and then allowed that child to disappear into a system built for children who had no one. "We did what we had to do," my mother said. "You don't understand. I understand you claimed her as a dependent on your taxes in 82 and 83, 2 full years after she was already in foster care. And I understand that when she found you 25 years ago and rang your doorbell, you closed the door in her face." My father's recliner squeaked. He was sitting forward now, hands on the armrests, the posture he used when he was preparing to end something. "Where did you get those? Does it matter? Those are private family documents, Aaron. She is family. That is what the court records say." My father stood up. The dangerous quiet settled over him like a coat he had been waiting to put on. He did not raise his voice. He lowered it. "You're done, Aaron. This conversation is done. That girl was in our house for 2 years and it didn't work. We made a decision. You benefited from that decision. Every meal you ate, every school you went to, every Christmas morning in this house." He paused. "Let the silence do the work. Don't bite the hand. My mother was crying. The kind of crying that involves a lot of tissue and very little sound. The kind of crying that is designed to make the person watching feel responsible for causing it. "Please," she said. "Please just let this be." I drove home thinking I had won. I had said Bonnie's name in the house where she used to live. I had held my ground and I had not apologized and I had not brought a casserole. But somewhere on Route 3, in the dark stretch where the streetlights thin out, something hollow opened inside my chest. My parents' faces had not shown shame. They had shown inconvenience. Over 40 years of a child's erasure, and the primary emotion in that kitchen had been annoyance at being caught. I sat on the couch. The cat jumped into my lap. The apartment was dark, except for the light from my phone, and on the screen the photographs of the tax returns glowed like evidence at a trial that everyone except me was trying to get dismissed. The call came on Friday morning, the day after the confrontation. I was on the couch with the cat on my stomach and my phone face down on the coffee table because I had been staring at the photographs of the tax returns for so long that the numbers had stopped looking like numbers and started looking like accusations aimed at me personally. My ribs had settled into a dull background hum by now, the kind of pain that becomes furniture if you sit still long enough. The knee brace was propped against the couch because I only wore it for stairs and long walks, and I was doing neither. My father's name on the screen. I picked up because 27 years of training does not dissolve in 10 days. Because the part of me that had spent a lifetime learning to answer when called was still operating on reflex, even when the rest of me was burning down every assumption that reflex was built on. I want you to think about what you're doing. His voice was calm and level, the same register he used when he explained to a homeowner that their entire electrical panel needed replacing, and the quote was going to be higher than they expected. Measured. Authoritative. The voice of a man who considered his perspective the default setting and anyone else's a deviation requiring correction. That woman showed up at your hospital bed and told you a story. You don't know her. You don't know what she wants. A pause. Engineered for wait. But I know what she is. She's someone who saw an opportunity. He did not raise his voice. That was what made it work. My father's quiet operated at a frequency designed to bypass the rational brain and go straight to the part of you that was still a child being told the room upstairs was storage. I said nothing. He filled the gap. You went through our personal documents. You went to the courthouse. You sat at our table and accused your mother of things that happened before you were born, things you have zero context for, things you cannot possibly understand. Another pause. I'm not angry, Aaron. I'm concerned. That woman is manipulating you. I hung up and set the phone down on the coffee table. The cat, who had been asleep on my stomach, lifted her head and looked at me with the expression of a creature that processes emotional disturbance as a minor disruption to her napping schedule. Saturday was my mother. I did not answer, so the voicemail played while I stood at the kitchen sink washing a mug I had already washed twice. Her voice cracking in the places she needed it to crack, the tears arriving on cue, the particular rhythm of a woman who had spent 4 decades using grief as a governance tool. Your father hasn't slept, Aaron. He's been sitting in that recliner since Thursday night. He's talking about changing the locks. Her breath caught and held and then released in a shudder that could have been real or could have been the performance of a woman who had learned exactly how much air to let out for maximum effect. Please, I can't lose you too. I set the mug on the counter and stood very still. She had said, too, I can't lose you 200. In the middle of a voicemail designed to make me feel guilty enough to drive to Westerville with an apology and a casserole, my mother's mouth had let through the one word she had spent my entire lifetime keeping sealed. 2. There had been someone before me, someone she had already lost. And even now, even in the performance of her own distress, the grammar of that original loss was woven so deep into her speech that she could not edit it out. Sunday morning. A text from my father. 7 words, no punctuation. If you pursue this, we're done. Your choice. Your choice. The 2 words that sounded like an offer and operated as a threat. Choose us or choose her. He was offering me the identical arrangement he had offered Bonnie 25 years ago when she stood on his porch, and he closed the door. I sat on my couch in Clintonville with my phone in my hand and my cat on the windowsill, and the wooden stairs creaking in the October wind outside, and every instinct I had was screaming the same instruction it had been screaming since I was 12 years old. Apologize. Smooth it over. Drive to Westerville. Bring something warm in a dish. Walk past the locked room without looking. Be the good daughter. Be the only daughter. But there was a birthday card in Bonnie's wallet with my mother's handwriting on it, and photographs of 2 tax returns on my phone showing 2 dependents in a house that only held 1 child, and a room upstairs in my parents' house with a brass knob that I had never been given the key to. I did not respond to any of them. I set the phone on the coffee table, screen down, and sat in the silence of my apartment while the afternoon light moved across the floor. 3 messages in 3 days, each one a different weapon, and I had answered none of them. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever done. Monday evening I drove to Franklinton. Bonnie's street was at the edge of the neighborhood where the porch lights were still incandescent, and the houses were small enough that you could hear a television through the walls. Her bungalow sat at the end of the block. Chain-link fence, tidy yard, a garden bed along the front that had been put to sleep for the season with a layer of mulch, wind chimes on the porch, the same ones I had noticed the first time she described her house to me at the coffee shop in German Village. They were copper tubes, and they made a sound like someone running a finger along the rim of a glass. Bonnie was already outside when I pulled up, 2 mugs on the porch railing. She was wearing a cardigan over scrubs, which meant she had come straight from a shift, and the tiredness on her face was layered in a way I was learning to read. The surface layer was shift-tired, the kind that 12 hours in a trauma unit puts on a person. Underneath that was something older and heavier, the kind of tired that settles in when something you sealed shut a long time ago has started to leak. I came up the steps. She handed me a mug. Chamomile again. The Sleepy Time Bear on the tag. "I need you to stop," Bonnie said. I was still standing. The mug was warm in my hands and the wind chimes were making their glass-rim sound, and the word stop did not connect to anything I was prepared to hear from the one person I had been counting on to keep going. "What?" "Whatever you're doing with your parents. The records, the confrontation, the courthouse paperwork." She turned her mug in her hands. The compass rose tattoo on her inner wrist rotated with it. "Stop. Bonnie, they committed fraud. They claimed you as a dependent for 2 years after you were in foster care. They never terminated your rights. They spent over 40 years pretending you were a storage room, and when I put the evidence in front of them, my father told me not to bite the hand. I have known what they did for 45 years, Aaron. Then why would you want me to stop?" She looked at me. The look was patient and exhausted and old in a way that had nothing to do with the number of years she had been alive. "Because I cannot go back to being 4 years old sitting on that bed, waiting for someone to come back through the door." She explained it the way she explained medical procedures to families in the trauma unit, calmly, with the necessary details and without decoration. She had spent 2 decades building herself from nothing. Foster care to a gas station in Zanesville to nursing school to a bungalow in Franklinton, she bought with money she earned working doubles for 15 years. The structure of her life was made of scar tissue. Scar tissue is what the body builds when the original material is too damaged to repair. It is tougher than skin. It holds. But it holds because it is rigid, because it does not stretch, because it's sealed around the wound and hardened, and the price of that hardness is that you cannot open it again without bleeding. "You are doing this because you are angry," Bonnie said, "and you have every right to be angry. I would be angry too. But you are 27 years old and you have been carrying this for 3 weeks. I have been carrying it for 45 years, and the only reason I am still standing is that I stopped carrying it a long time ago." She paused. "I am asking you to leave me out of it." I sat down on the porch steps. The tea went cold in my hands. The wind chimes counted out the seconds above my head. My parents were demanding silence. Bonnie was asking for peace. And I was standing in the middle holding photographs and courthouse records and a teddy bear with a loose letter on its ear, and every person on both sides of this was telling me to put it down. I had driven to Franklinton looking for an ally, and the ally had gently, carefully, without anger or blame, closed the door. The drive home was quiet, October dark, streetlights on the bridge, the river below catching the light in streaks. 14 missed calls from a hospital had started this. And now one closed door on a porch in Franklinton might be the thing that ended it. 3 in the morning. My apartment. The cat was on the pillow next to my head. My ribs sent a low pulse of pain with every breath. Fading now, 3 weeks out from the accident, but still present. The room. I kept coming back to the room. The one door I had not opened. My whole life, that door had been closed. My mother locked it. My father pretended it did not exist. And I had walked past it 10,000 times on my way to every other part of a house that had been built on top of a secret. I was part of it. I was born into the clean, empty space that Bonnie's erasure had created. My parents gave up a 4-year-old with night terrors, and 18 years later they had a biological daughter who slept through the night and did not scream and did not remind them of anything they could not face. Every Christmas morning in that house, every birthday cake, every casserole my mother packed for my apartment, every faucet my father fixed without being asked, came from 2 people who had already demonstrated that they could throw a child away. They did not stop wanting a daughter. They stopped wanting that daughter. And then they had me, the biological one, the real one, the one who would never come with a history they could not manage. Bonnie was erased first. Then I was born into the vacancy. I got out of bed, pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt. Did not bother with the knee brace because the swelling was gone and the stiffness only mattered on stairs. My keys were on the hook by the door. The cat lifted her head, decided this was not her concern, and went back to sleep. I drove to Westerville at 5 in the morning. The roads were empty. Route 3 was dark in the stretch where the streetlights thin out between Clintonville and the suburbs, and my headlights were the only ones on the road for almost a mile. My parents' house was dark. Both cars in the driveway. My father's truck, recently washed. My mother's sedan behind it. Spare key. Ceramic frog. The front door opened without a sound because my father oiled the hinges twice a year, one of the many small maintenance rituals he performed to keep the surface of things smooth. The house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet at 5 in the morning when the people inside are asleep and the refrigerator is the only thing running. I went past the living room, past the recliner, past the kitchen where the oven light was on because my mother always left the oven light on overnight, a habit she had never explained and I had never asked about. Down the hallway, the door. Same brass knob I had pressed my palm against the week before when I came for the tax returns. Still locked. I went to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, the one with the screwdrivers and the batteries and the rubber bands and the key ring my father kept for the house. 16 keys on the ring. I tried them one at a time. The first 3 did not fit. The 4th turned. The lock clicked. I pushed the door open. The room was small. A single window on the far wall, and through it the maple tree, bare in October. A bed frame pushed against the wall. Metal. No mattress. Empty closet. Carpet worn in a path from the bed to the door, as if a very small person had walked that route over and over, checking to see if someone was coming. One thing on the wall, pencil marks on the inside of the doorframe, 3 of them in my mother's careful handwriting. 2 feet 4 inches, 2 feet 7 inches, 2 feet 10 inches. 3 years of a child's growth. And then nothing. The room was clean. There was no dust on the windowsill, no cobwebs, no film on the glass. My mother had been cleaning this room for over 40 years, locking the door and then coming back to clean behind it, dusting the windowsill of a bedroom that had been empty since before I was born. I sat down on the bare bed frame. The metal was cold. Making them answer was never going to be enough. They already had the answers. My mother cleaned this room because she carried Bonnie in the only way she could tolerate, in private, behind a locked door. My father washed his truck because if the surface was clean, then the interior did not have to be examined. I needed to stop being the good daughter. I needed to stop being the investigator. I needed to be a sister. I took out my phone and opened the camera and photographed the height chart on the doorframe. 3 pencil marks in my mother's handwriting. 2 feet 4 inches, 2 feet 7, 2 feet 10. The growth of a child who was being watched and then was not. I sent the photograph to Bonnie. No text, no caption, no explanation, just the image. The reply came at 5:47 in the morning. 3 words. That was me. I sat on the bare bed frame in the cold room and read those 3 words until the screen dimmed. That was me. She had been here. She had slept in this room and looked at that tree, and now, 45 years later, someone had finally opened the door. I locked the room behind me, put the keys back, replaced the spare key under the ceramic frog. My parents were still asleep. I called Bonnie on Wednesday evening. She picked up on the 4th ring, and in the background I could hear the muffled sound of a hospital intercom paging someone to the 3rd floor, which meant she was on shift and had stepped into a hallway to answer. "I'm not asking you to fight," I said. "I'm not asking you to forgive them. I'm asking you to sit at a table in the house where you used to live." I paused. "That's all. Just sit there." The hospital intercom paged again. A cart rolled past her on a squeaky wheel. Bonnie was quiet for a long time, the particular quiet of a woman measuring the distance between what she had built and what she might lose by walking back into a building she had been carried out of at 4 years old. "Why?" she said. "Because you deserve to take up space in a room they locked you out of." Another silence, longer than the first. "Sunday?" "Sunday. I called my mother on Thursday morning. I want to have dinner. Sunday. At your house. I'm bringing a guest." "Who?" "Someone who should have been at our table a long time ago." My father picked up the extension. "If you bring that woman into my house..." "It's her house too, Dad. Legally." He hung up. My mother stayed on the line for 3 more seconds without speaking, and in the breathing was the sound of a woman who had been holding a door shut for over 40 years and could hear it starting to give. Saturday I spent alone. I gathered 3 things: the teddy bear, the photographs on my phone, and 1 phone call to Bonnie. Bring the card. Sunday, 5 in the afternoon. I parked on the street in front of my parents' house. Yellow siding, porch light on, my father's truck in the driveway, the ceramic frog by the front step. A car pulled up behind me. An older Honda, navy blue. Bonnie got out wearing a cardigan over a blouse, and she stood on the sidewalk and looked at the house for a long time without moving. "The maple tree is bigger," she said. I could see it from where we stood, rising above the roofline from the backyard, its branches bare and reaching over the fence into the neighbor's yard. The same tree that had been visible from the upstairs window. The window of the room I had unlocked 5 days ago at 5 in the morning while my parents slept. "Ready?" I said. I have been ready for 25 years. We walked to the front door. I rang the bell, even though I had a key. This was an arrival. My mother opened the door. Her eyes went to Bonnie and stayed there for 2 full seconds, the longest she had looked at Bonnie since the hospital room, and something passed across her face that was too quick and too layered for a single word. Then she stepped aside. The hallway opened behind her, warm and bright, and the smell of cinnamon came through the doorway because of course she had been baking since noon. The dining room. 4 plates on the table, 4 sets of silverware, 4 glasses of water. My mother had set 4 places. She had spent the morning setting the table for a daughter she had not fed in over 40 years. My father was already seated at the head, arms crossed, jaw set, reading glasses on the table in front of him like a tool he had decided he would not need. He looked at Bonnie the way he looked at weather through the kitchen window, something arriving that he could not prevent and had decided to endure rather than acknowledge. He did not stand. We sat. Bonnie took the chair closest to the kitchen, the chair that faced the hallway and the stairs and, if you leaned slightly to the right, the locked door at the top of the staircase. I sat beside her. The silence at that table had a weight to it, a physical density, as if every unspoken sentence from the past 4 decades had been compressed into the air above the salt and pepper shakers. "Say whatever you came to say," my father said. I didn't come to say anything. I reached into my bag and pulled out the teddy bear. Set it on the table between the water glasses. Brown, soft. Bonnie stitched on the ear in pink thread, the first letter coming loose. My mother's hands, which had been folded in her lap, went still. She stared at the bear as if it were a living thing, as if it had walked into the room under its own power and sat down at the table and introduced itself. I set my phone beside the bear, screen up, the photographs of the tax returns displayed side by side. 1982 and 1983, dependents, 2. Then I looked at Bonnie. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, the pocket close to her chest where she had kept it since the coffee shop in German Village, and she pulled out the birthday card. She placed it on the table beside the tax returns, carefully, the way a person places flowers on a grave. Happy 3rd birthday. Love, Mom and Dad. 3 items on a dinner table between the water glasses. A teddy bear from an attic, 2 tax returns from a cardboard box, and a birthday card that a woman had carried in her wallet for 31 years. You signed this card, I said. You measured her height on that door frame. You filed her as your daughter on your taxes for 2 years after she was in foster care. I looked at my father, and when she came back at 24 and rang your doorbell, you told her you were not her family and you closed the door. My father started to speak. She's not. She is. I went to the courthouse. You never terminated your parental rights. You never signed the papers. You never went before a judge. You just stopped showing up. I paused. And then you locked her room and told me it was storage. My mother was looking at the birthday card. Her right hand moved toward it, hovered above the cartoon bear on the cover, and stopped. Her fingers hung in the air an inch from the card. She could not touch it, and she could not pull her hand away. I turned to Bonnie. You don't have to say anything. Bonnie looked at my mother. 45 years since the social worker's blue car that smelled like French fries. 25 years since the closed door and the 5 words and the toddler on the living room floor. The woman sitting across the table was the woman who had taught Bonnie to brush her teeth, who had measured her against the door frame with a pencil, who had written love, Mom and Dad in her careful, looping cursive, and meant it for exactly 3 years. I don't want your money, Bonnie said. Her voice was steady in the way that hospital walls are steady, built to hold terrible things without showing the strain. I don't want your house. I don't want an apology, because an apology would mean you think you can fix this, and you can't. She looked at my mother, and then at my father, and then back at my mother. I just want you to say my name. My father looked at the table, the bear, the card, the tax returns. 3 pieces of evidence that he could not dismiss as ancient history because they were sitting right here between the water glasses, as present and undeniable as the woman sitting across from him. My mother whispered it. The sound was so small it could have been a breath, could have been the house settling, could have been anything except what it was. Bonnie. The dining room held the name the way a church holds a bell's last vibration. I watched it land on Bonnie's face. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, they were wet, but her jaw was steady, and she gave one small nod. My father did not say the name. His jaw worked once, twice, the muscles tightening and releasing as if the word were caught somewhere between his throat and his teeth, and he could not find the combination that would let it through. But he stayed in his chair. The man who solved every uncomfortable conversation by leaving the room, who answered hard questions by turning up the television, who had closed the door on his first daughter and walked back to his recliner, without looking back, stayed in his chair. His hands were flat on the table, one on each side of the birthday card, and he did not leave. That was his version, as much as he had. After the dinner that nobody ate, my mother cleared the plates with the efficiency of a woman who has cleaned up after difficult meals for over 40 years. The casserole went back in the oven. The silverware went in the dishwasher. My father went to the living room and turned on the television, volume low, tuned to a channel that neither of us could have named if asked. Bonnie and I stepped through the sliding glass door into the backyard. The evening was cool, and the air smelled like wet leaves and someone's fireplace down the block. The maple tree stood in the center of the yard, its branches bare, reaching over the fence. Bonnie walked to the trunk and looked up through the branches at the upstairs window. I used to see this tree from up there, she said. I would count the leaves. I don't know why. 3-year-olds count things. I stood beside her. What happens now? I asked. I go home. I work tomorrow. Tuesday I'm on a double shift in the trauma unit. That's not what I mean. Bonnie turned the collar of her cardigan up against the evening air. I know what you mean. She paused. I have no idea. I did not plan past the table. I didn't either. We stood under the tree. A car passed on the street out front. The wind chime on someone's porch down the block rang once and then went quiet. You called me your sister, Bonnie said. On the phone, when you asked me to come. You are my sister. Legally. In every way that counts. I looked at the house. The upstairs window. 3 pencil marks on a door frame behind a locked door. My mother would probably lock the room again tomorrow. My father would probably wash his truck. They might call me in a week, or a month, or never. I could not control any of that. What I could control was the teddy bear. I went back inside and picked up the bear from the dining table. My mother was at the sink with her back to the room. My father was in his recliner. Neither looked at me. On the front porch, Bonnie was holding her car keys. I held out the bear. She took it. Her thumb moved across the stitched name on the ear, tracing the letters. The first letter still loose, the thread pulling away after all these years. She put the bear in the passenger seat of her car, where she could see it on the drive home. Good night, Aaron. Good night. I drove home. Clintonville, 2nd floor. The wooden stairs creaked under my feet the way they always did, and the cat was on the pillow the way she always was, and the apartment was quiet the way it always was. Everything the same and everything different. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Bonnie. Got home safe. I typed back. Same. A pause. Long enough that I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling and listened to the cat breathe. Then the phone lit up one more time. A photograph. The teddy bear on Bonnie's nightstand, next to a lamp and a nursing textbook. 15 years under my bed. Now where it was always supposed to be. I put my phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark with the cat purring beside me. I was 27 years old. 3 weeks ago, I had been in a car accident and woken up in a hospital room with a stranger in the chair beside my bed. The stranger turned out to be my sister. My parents turned out to be the kind of people who could give a child a birthday party and a height chart and a room with a maple tree and then lock all of it away and never say a word for the rest of their lives. The room was open now.